Shirley here with Sirius Dallas Moon Jupiter hour, Jupiter day turning into Moon night. Moon plan to conjoin Mars and Chiron in Aries. Ascendant almost on the galactic center, midheaven 11 degrees Libra. Venus on the descendant. Mercury separating with conjunction with the Sun. And when we think about orgasmic birthing, it's not misplaced arousal. And what do I mean by that? It's not compatible with command. And this brings me to the command, or the Judaic command, or the biblical command to multiply, to fill the earth in Genesis. And this is basically associated with occultistic rituals that are raping people to have misplaced arousal under mind control. And people that did not consent to that, they're not willing to have any sort of power exchange, let's say. And we see that a lot with projects, classified projects like MK Ultra, where the attempts to have people orgasm on command. Now again, I'm not talking about couples that practice that in kinky settings where they both enjoy that. Not the issue. But I'm talking about how this is not compatible with orgasmic birthing that honors the feminine, honors the mist, the unknown, is not under command. And here we get into, when we think about rewriting Genesis, the notion that all of those subjugation relations caused the exile from heaven, but they also caused the exile of the Jews. They also caused anti-Semitism. They also caused a persecution. And this prompts the questions around orgasmic birth cultures. You know, another thing that came up is the cause of genitalia mutilation. And I've seen a lot of Israeli channels try to talk about orgasmic birthing, then immediately they had, the glorification of circumcision. Now, I grew up in Israel. I was at least one or two times. I thought I come to the party after baby is born, and it was a boy. The women that were not the mother thought that they are going to have milk out of their breasts from the trauma. Now, this trauma makes child susceptible to mind control. And then, what is mind control? It means that the child could commit crimes that is not the child committing a crime. Watch Douglas McIntyre by Annika Lucas. And this is the butter and butter of ritual abuse. And so, from the stories of childbirth, orgasmic childbirth, so women talking about pain-free childbirth versus women glorifying pain. Now, of course, experiences are on a spectrum. But the more people glorify pain, now I'm not talking, of course, breathing into contractions and so on and so forth, but the more people are aligned with glorifying pain, the more they are susceptible to glorifying genital mutilation. That glorifies and opens the door for ritual abuse of the infant, and opens the door for intergenerational trajectory that has to do with crime, rather than wealth that is embodied and has to do with no subjugation relations. Now, one way in which my island Denebalgidi water bottle, not butter, I did not get to do butter with Denebalgidi, it would be great, but we'll need to have good election, nice oils, some shea butter maybe, but this is where I saw a lady giving birth in the water, and it was at sea, and it was calm waters at sea, not possible so much by the North Sea. It's kind of like, before you try this at home, make sure you're not living by the North Sea. So, but other than that, it was on an island. And I'm like, oh my God. From Deneb Al Gadi with island, thinking about transmuting the stories like around Epstein Island, to a woman giving birth at calm waters, her husband and children watching, giving her the space to bring life, and the child comes and she lifts him from the water. And then there was somebody that was asking if it was safe, if the water is safe. It's like, no, the water was clear. And I'm like, ooh, I see this water bottle doing things. And this is like, only now I'm beginning to connect to that. And this is really, really beautiful also to watch what there was the bracelet and the unification of the sects, and how we can transcend even the fears that we have as astrologers using astrology. So also the language, the cultures that are, I'm sorry, rape cultures, not compatible with life. This brings genocide. But it's true. Cultures that glorify violence. Now, what cultures are more orgasmic birth cultures? Let's try to see if we can have a study life together. Um, Orgasmic birth: the anatomy of pleasure at childbirth, 2025. Let's see if it is available. Okay, abstract. Contemporary childbirth practices, which have long been globally dominated by biomedicalized framework, have been, and this is PubMed, have sterilized the birthing experience, stripped away emotional and physical pleasures as well as essential aspects of a woman's sexuality, and have led to loss of autonomy for many women and birthing people, and thus, of course, many men and whatever gender. In this article, I propose an alternative model of care, orgasmic birth, and I explain this model emphasizes respectful perinatal care. Now, this is Deborah Pascali Bonaro, Front Globe Women Health, May 2025. So it's about a year ago. Yes, orgasmic birth. And I explained this model emphasized respectful perinatal care, pleasurable births, and the childbearer's empowerment. By drawing on my reviews of the extensive scientific literature on hormonal interplays, the anatomies of pleasure, and the sexuality, in this article I also discuss how biomedical interventions such as synthetic hormones, epidural nerve blocks, and cesarean disrupt the natural hormonal flow that is associated with pleasurable birth. Now, I have to admit, for me, thinking about epidural blocks is something that I'm of two minds about, let's say. The results of my literature reviews have shown that a more holistic, respectful approach to prenatal care can reduce pain, decrease birth traumas, and improve satisfaction by acknowledging the important roles of pleasure and sexuality during childbirth. I also strongly argue that the future research should explore how biomedical systems can integrate practices that honor both safety and potential for pleasure during childbirth. Now, here is the thing. A lot of these things have to do with Epstein dossier's infiltration of the medical system. And even before Epstein, this means that many men and women are eligible for reparations for not having this type of care accessible, and it causes birth traumas. So people may have been in criminal activities, people may have been in jail. And all of that was funded by classified projects budget of various countries and international organizations. Not only that, tending to these topics can both change policies, and I'm inspired by Christopher Warnock, who was astrological magician and attorney, and he said that the way he uses law is basically to get the attention, and by mass litigation, we can get the attention that, hey, there is public request for the reparations of that not having been accessible, which caused crime, which caused suicide rates, which caused lack of faith in life which causes stigmatic medical care, which causes legal procedures that are inadequate with life, which causes excess conflict unnecessarily, which added to marginalization of people. For example, around Second World War, a lot of the midwives were lost because they wore BIPOC. Now, of course, the solution would be that also BIPOC women would have access to orgasmic birthing. My great-grandmother Angelina had repeatedly described having given birth to 8 children at home in early 1900s. She spoke of challenges and intensity, but never mentioned pain or fear. Now, sometimes never mentioned because there were pain, but people were not talking about this, which is important when we take a look at interviews and methodology. Her stories illustrated how she had freely walked, moved, gave birth in upright positions, which have long been proven to facilitate the birthing process, for example, of the multiple benefits of using such positions. Observing her siblings being born had given Angelina's oldest daughter, my grandmother's Philomena, confidence in her own ability to give birth. However, in her first pregnancy, what is now called the biomedical and/or the technocratic model of birth had become hegemonic. She had lacked the support system and female companionship from which her mother's birth had benefited. Philomena recalled feeling alone and sacred and scared, guided not by a body's instinct but by a male doctor who had given her instructions to stay in bed during her labor and birth. Again, something that is not compatible, but also when I listen to stories of traditional childbirth, where mother put hands on the infant and say they needed all the power to come here because it's tough life here, it's infant trauma. And so I can see how certain things were transforming, and it's not about bringing back the 1900s as much as it is about sorting the wheat from the chaff regarding any period. Her story illustrated pain, fear, and the silencing of her voice and her own inner wisdom. In just one generation, the birthing paradigm had been transformed from a model of woman-centeredness to a paradigm of biomedical hegemony. Inspired by my grandmother's birth. Now here is the thing, when there was ritual abuse and the mothers were not aware or doing anything, it created a dissociation. It created the belief that, hey, that mommy doesn't necessarily knows best. Whoa. Now, of course, this was the point of ritual abuse, but a lot of the models for ritual abuse have to do with certain shamanic practices that may have accentuated torture and glorifying pain, and were the origin of the practices that we don't like today in ritual abuse. Like I said, sorting the wheat. I remember when I talked about, let's say, native psychiatric care or native mental health care. I was looking at women experiences, and they were sharing tips on how to break, let's say, psychic attacks, which they called a spiritual marriage, which was spiritual rape. a man went to look to study, and he saw people being tortured as some sort of exorcism that remind us of the Christian practices that are. And just by me being a woman exposed to woman content and that person being a man, the difference in what we saw. And even when there was shamanic around women, they were instructed that their body can do everything and contain everything, as not always compatible. And this is why when people talk about pain-free, we need to take into account that some people don't talk about the pain, and but some people have also pain tolerance, and also um, of those that are actually pain-free. What were the cultures? What were the cultures around? What supported that being a pain-free birth, where a woman is in the position saying, Mom, can you give me a towel? The mom goes to pick a towel, and then she comes back and she says, with one of the interviews, Mom, catch the baby. So, um, so some people say, yeah, hereditary, but hereditary is the practices along generation. And so if we are being realistic, probably there are some practices that can facilitate easier, more orgasmic birthing, and understand and pain-free is possible. And maybe there are changes, societal changes, and so on and so forth. Somebody's like watching this right now, pregnant, and they had difficult matrilineage births. It's like, okay, maybe it's not going to be like this pain-free birth and so on and so forth, but there are things that can alleviate, and to know what are the practices that support pain-free birth is probably not going to do harm to begin to practice them. um, um, so, orgasmic birth as birthing approach disputes the dominant culture narrative that childbirth is inherently painful and traumatic. As early as 1955, Jesse Shirley Bernard and Niels Newton had described women's behavior during their births as sexual. Um, some researchers have noticed that laboring women exhibit similar expressions and behaviors to those experienced during moments of sexual intimacy, including breathing patterns and vocalization, and loss of social inhibitions. Um, yes, Bernard and Newton had also compared birth with an orgasm, and had additionally shown that birthing women often have an unusual strength and agility at delivering and orgasm. A sudden return of awareness afterwards. Now, when we talk about currency, um, currency need to support in the ritual and esoterics orgasmic birthing. It's also important for the, we saw with several companies how they began to be held accountable for the many child trafficking rings that they had, whether it was social media or whether it was divorce settlements for billionaires and so on, because they used um, esoterics to do with the fertility of women, but not in such that support orgasmic birthing and by consent. For example, if somebody would say, I don't know, they want to have a particular car that is going to be safety car and flying car and whatnot, and ethically sourcing of the minerals and ecosystemic, and I would say, okay, but maybe women can manifest this when they orgasm. This, why not? If we get the car, right? We get. um, but when they practice this with um, rituals that are violent and not supportive of orgasmic birthing, then it made actually it made complications for the companies. So orgasmic birth can also be a more esoteric approach of orgasmic birthing as alchemy and creation, which must have, of course, willing consent. Not compatible with trafficking rings, but it's also the way out of those realities, because the people that grew up in trafficking ring-based societies are eligible for reparations, and the complications that it creates for all the businesses, the companies, even the corporations, they're already evident. Understanding the hormones of pleasure, sexuality, and childbirth has shed light on Niels Newton's observation of their multiple benefits. The hormones of childbirth, prolactin, oxytocin, adrenaline, beta endorphins, flow similarly to those of orgasm and can be disturbed and interrupted by the usually misguided and often unnecessary biomedical interventions in the birthing process. Many childbirth experts have long been asking why the sexuality of labor and births remain unacknowledged by biomedical practitioners. Some women have characterized their birthing experiences as orgasmic. And here's the thing, rape cultures are antithetical to life. They're antithetical to orgasmic birth, and it's like a volcanic eruption with our goal, for example, with dead bodies upon dead bodies of those who try to enforce rape culture. They turn into stone. Think about the volcanic eruption and then the congealing, the lava turned into stone. That's all the practice, all the esoteric practices, all the occult, all the rape culture, those who enforce the rape culture are turned into stone in volcanic eruption. And this is, of course, a metaphorical thing. We basically, in volcanic eruption, we turn into stone so that the monuments are no longer having those practices that prevent the changes in life and issuing of currency and issuing and launching and birthing of things and birthing of children to be orgasmic birthing of love and embodiment and a willing consent and relaxed arousal. I strongly advocate for a birth culture that respects and supports the normal physiologic birthing process, transforms pain to power, and incorporates moments of pleasure, joy, and love during pregnancies, labors, and birth. Now, again, transforming pain into power is lovely, but it's important to discern between glorification of pain, because there's a grain of truth of transforming pain into power. That being said, it's not moments of pleasure, joy, and love. It's the other way around. And because when we think about relations that are standing in our power, then we have way more love, joy, and pleasure. Um, and then what could be seeming painful is more easily transformed into pleasure. Why? Because we are relaxing into, and then we have basically less pain. And then we have orgasmic release. The flexibility, the agility of the body is around joy, love, and pleasure. That is what transmutes what people call pain, not to power, to actually flow and relaxed arousal. So this is something where the discernment here is very important. To achieve this type of birthing culture, I believe that it is important for birthing people to understand how female anatomies of reproduction and sexuality can provide opportunities for healing comfort in optimal heightened states. Orgasmic feeling they may include experiences of what Mayberry and Daniel have called birthgasm. Now, birthgasm is not just a child. Birthgasm is launching a project. Birthgasm is launching a new change in life. Birthgasm is a house that is compatible for birthgasms. Birthgasm is, a type of schedule and income revenue that is compatible with birthgasms. As some research have shown, many aspects of standard childbirth care, such as appearance of labor and delivery rooms as sick rooms, have negatively affected labor people's comfort and their birth outcomes. To find the pleasure during birth, a sensuous environment that creates a feeling of safety and privacy is needed. Also for orgasms. My experiences of having attended hundreds of births as a doula have shown that while it is usually easier to create feelings of safety and comfort during home births and births in freestanding birth centers, doulas and midwives, like lifeguards on beach, provide a gentle and supportive presence for women and their partners during their hospital births. The missing element of childbirth education. My experience has also shown that pleasure aids in healing and should be included in preparation for childbirth, as it has calming effects, aids in pain management, and creates heightened states of ecstasy. Somebody talked about the differences between ecstasy and dissociation. And the difference is that for this ecstasy is that embodied experience rather than reaching what people call ecstasy through pain. Okay, one is ritual abuse and one is orgasmic birthing. That discernment is important. One could get people to normalize genitalia mutilation that allows a trauma that will be affecting sense of self of baby and make them susceptible to extortion and kidnapping and so on. One supports sense of self of baby and negates genitalia mutilation and subjugation relations. The first birth pleasure study had found that pleasure during childbirth has induced emotional, mental, spiritual, physical, and sexual aspects. The types of pleasure that Bolanza had most frequently cited had been emotional, mental, spiritual, physical, and sexual pleasures. Yes, from almost 100% emotional, mental, spiritual 76%, physical 61%. Again, these are they put okay. For analyzing this, they basically need to interview women, and with the methodology, they need to find the phrases that are associated with each of the things, and then they basically run a statistical model on those phrasing. Bolanza had also found that for those who had chosen to give birth in their homes, their pleasure experiences had been heightened. This is why we need housing that's compatible for orgasmic birth. If a woman is screaming and so on and so forth, and we also need to abolish, yes, sexual violence, because so people will not be traumatized or have fear to go into that ecstasy of orgasmic birthing. Women give birth through the sexual organs, cervix, vagina, labia, and clitoral complex. Yet standard biomedical childbirth practices and biomedical practitioners do not typically acknowledge the strong connection between birth and sexuality. Having been constrained by cultural taboos, even biomedical texts omit the clitoris, which is Rachel E. Gross has importantly noted. For example, this is why in cultures where they have genitalia mutilation, they basically scrum against humanity, scrum against childbirth, or against life, and against orgasmic birthing, and this can cause excess violence in such societies that can bring to colonization, genocide, and so on and so forth. Even biomedical texts omit, yes, the clitoris is, now as is biomedicine's most neglected human organ is the clitoris, which is yes, just for us to get the picture of how. Now just think about the world with orgasmic birthing. We don't know the world without rape, and we don't know the world with orgasmic birthing, where the most of the population is orgasmic birthing. what all of the population has for the birthing experience, that is orgasmic birthing, where life transitions are of orgasmic birthing, where the mental health system is informed of orgasmic birthing. At one story, they wanted to call the psychiatrist when a woman was attuned to her body during childbirth. She says, I firmly believe that this lack of sexual awareness jeopardizes the survival of sexual abuse, the survivors of sexual abuse, thereby leaving them unprepared and without having opportunities to access healing and knowledge. It also endangers the baby's well-being. It causes birth traumas to everyone. Now, even tending to orgasmic birthing is already alleviating those birth traumas. Regardless if somebody is going to give birth or to go through life transition. And I'm sure a lot of these practices can be practices by men or by people that have a past menopause. Um, so, um, also thereby potentially exacerbating their traumas, and instead of helping them to have healing childbirth experiences. Um, Replace childbirth with life transition, rehabilitation. Okay, not compatible with trafficking. I've also found that understanding one's pleasure anatomy and learning about the important role of the clitoris in the childbirth provides an opportunity for many women who are not familiar with their clitoral complex to expand with the pleasure during their pregnancies and learn ways to use pleasure as a comfort measure during their childbirth. During a prenatal appointment, um, a client profoundly shifted my perspective. When I asked if there was anything else she wanted, now by the way, one of the things that around COVID I went through with the ritual abuse was, and also I know a teacher for me for aromatherapy that went through that, is torture what we got in the womb. And we saw the things that later happened in 7th of October. And of course, if Palestinian women experienced that, I believe them. Because the whole issue was that those are extortion cults that would extort those, what, let's say that the Holocaust, it was like Jews trafficked the Jews to Nazis and then humiliated the women and extorted Nazis basically to have the Holocaust because they wanted to loot the wealth of the Jews. But those families, to begin with, they did not have practices for orgasmic birthing and honoring the feminine, and birthing was more closer to puberty. Now, and they went by Genesis, and his book is of subjugation relation. And esoteric traditions that harm life. and create persecutions. Um, so um, so um, opening a drawer, she revealed vibrators gifted by friends to prepare for orgasmic birth. Now, tantrically, people might want to discern whether they want to use vibrating stuff or to prepare for a tantric orgasm, which basically means that the people, if they use, let's say, dildo, is not with vibration. Um, but if people are more comfortable with vibration, of course, childbirth then is, I don't see anything wrong with that. It's just for normal when we want to connect with our orgasmic self, then we try to reduce vibey things. Again, to each their own, but is something that can greatly contribute to well-being. Um, being able to connect with our orgasmic self, yes, and honor erotic, non-erotic, which is the times where we need to be in our inner child state or we need to be in our infant state. This will begin to prevent, let's say, self-violations. Um, during her labor, I watched her experience ecstasy during each surge as she puts vibrator on clitoris and feel pleasure instead of feeling pain. Yes, exactly. When she had wanted to enter the birthing pool, um, but there was trouble because she didn't have waterproof vibrator. Um, my job as her doula had to become wrapping vibrations. Okay, people that make waterproof sexual this thing and are looking for investors. I have my dollar from income from food stamps. Um, but I would need tips and patterns to prevent, first of all, to prevent a self harm and be informed of tantric embodiment, so not to cause a trauma to the body, and with people that have undergone, let's say, ritual abuse or psychic attacks, how to prevent, how to access the orgasmic self, patterns around this are very, I would love to invest in such companies that develop such things that support orgasmic birthing or birthgasms, even as orgasms. Um, yeah. Um, my preference is not for vibrators, although I don't. Let's say I would. Yes, this is pretty much. Um, if company has both vibrators and not vibrators, I will not invest, but to have a non-vibrator option. And not by subscription. What do I mean by that? Clippy friendly. Why was this not a commonly discussed non-pharmacological pain reduction technique? it had seemed to me that everyone would want to know about how masturbation and vibrators could erase pain and could provide pleasurable waves. Again, connecting with one's own internal wave of pleasure is now again, I'm not against this, I'm just reminding that this is another level of discernment of attunement. For example, if I think about when I just started to treat my tonal fungi, sometimes it would take me having to remind myself, because I was battling a lot of psychic attacks, to treat my tonal fungi, and sometimes it would be I would have no energy to clean my feet, so I would just have, and the oils that were smelling good would help me, and I would just put that even with the dirt, even with everything, because as disgusting as it may sound, I did not have energy to do more, so I was like in action showing that, like, that I tend to that. Now the things that those things brought. Um, and verses for when tending to my feet became something that I notice I tend to do around lunar cycles naturally. I don't even know why. Many couples find that kissing, nipple stimulation, clitoral stimulation, and other intimate acts provide sensation of pleasure during the labors and births. What happened to people that deal with DID? I know people that are mothers and have DID. Nevertheless, societal taboos have prevented the adoption of pleasure practices during biomedicalized childbirth. I strongly insist that it is time to revolutionize childbirth practices, understand birth as part of a woman's sexuality, and foster an environment wherein respect, safety, and sensuality, love converge to facilitate a pleasurable and orgasmic birthing experience. Defining orgasmic birthing, including various researchers have shown that orgasmic birth can elicit positive outcomes for women and birthing people by ensuring that expectant parents have access to safe, respectful, positive, pleasurable births. Now you see, think about the fact that Israel did not have that, and the fact that women had to give birth both in captivity, but also Palestinian women at hospitals, and the desensitization that led to extreme form, that kind of like the whole world was shocked, but they weren't shocked that in the Western hospitals is no orgasmic birthing facilitation. Okay? Why did we need to get to women in genocide having difficulty birth giving at a bombed hospital to think about, wait a second, orgasmic birthing could have prevented the entire thing from the get-go? She says, for me, orgasmic birthing involves creating positive language about birth, women's bodies and their sexuality, also men's bodies and their sexuality. Men self-mutilate so much. Finding moments of pleasure, and a novice, yes, a part of them culture, but it's the thing, they are entitled to reparations. Um, Finding moments of pleasure and feeling an inherent power. In a book, Orgasmic Birth Guide to a Safe, Satisfying Birth Experience, midwife Elizabeth Davis and I had described orgasmic birthing as broad enough to include those who describe birth as ecstatic and specific enough to give voice to those who actually feel the contraction of orgasm and climax. In my Orgasmic Birth Practitioner program, I teach birth doulas, midwives, and other healthcare professionals how to integrate pleasure and practices into their work. The interconnected nature of sexuality and childbirth urges both birth activists and biomedical practitioners to reevaluate the currently hegemonic model of biomedical care and of childbirth preparation. I additionally believe that by reframing childbirth as a pleasurable and sensual life event, birthing people can have their agency restored. Now here's the thing, it's not reframing, it's changing society so that it can be. Birthing people can have their agency restored and can become empowered by the pleasurable experiences during their pregnancies, births, and postpartum periods. So, hormones. Oxytocin is called the cuddle hormone, hormone of love, because it provides feelings of intimacy, relaxation, and connection. In other words, boosting oxytocin during labors supports the normal physiology of childbirth and also supports the mother-baby bond. I have, by the way, Cistus essential oil is also very supportive of these two. I have importantly noted, and the heels, which are connected to the birth canal, and by men also sexual organs, I believe. I think is where they generate the sperm. By males, okay, but people who are intersex, then it can be connected to both. I have importantly noted that there are many natural ways to increase oxytocin during childbirth. And again, for people who are transgender, then it's according to their the sex organs. Including eye-to-eye contact, loving words, safe touch, massage, and long hugs. Now, of course, ritual abuse, because extortion calls were meant to forcibly turn people to misplaced arousal in the relation so that they will be pansexual, then we need to have accommodation for the transitionary phase until people find out what their authentic sexual nature is without the trauma. We need to contain for them for all the options, while even if, let's say, somebody decides, not decides, to find out that there's cisgender in their sexuality, if that makes sense, then the transitional phase might have various phases that in our language we need to accommodate for, without ignoring the extortion code factor in creating misplaced